No, I'm just kidding. I'm not actually going to sing in this video. That's nothing that you asked for. So, Rent is a pretty old movie. It's 20 years old, actually, this year in 2025. Came out in 2005. And I know that media critique or media appreciation doesn't necessarily have a time period. It doesn't have a best before date. So I don't need to explain why I'm examining this, but I want to. Sometimes I think people miss the point when they talk about old media or even just like old YouTube. Obviously, we've heard a lot of this as like, oh, it was a different time and it was a different sense of humor. And yes, of course, that's true. All generations' sense of humor are going to be informed by their time period. That is just logical. However, the point I think they're missing is that you can actually still consume the media and be critical of it and use that to learn important things about today, because no movie is actually about what it's about. I mean, they are that like, okay, that's obviously a gross exaggeration. Please stick with me. It's just movies are in general made to have a statement about society, and musicals certainly. And I know that Rent is a very specific kind of movie musical based on the Broadway show Rent, which is ostensibly based on the original opera La Boheme. And if we're taking Rent into consideration, then obviously there is a lot of things that we can look at, comparatively speaking, from even when the movie was made to today, let alone the musical. And the musical slash movie are supposed to be set in like 1999, I think, or something like that. I know that there are a few anachronisms in some of the songs, I believe. Look, nothing is perfect, but I'm going to get into the weeds on, important social issues later. The point is that I'm going to be using a movie and musical that I truly loved and held in the highest of esteems, something that I was truly like obsessed with when I was a young queer teen. And a lot of the stuff that was wrong with it, because there is a lot wrong with it, just completely went over my head. And I think it's important to look at those things and to maybe help other people so that they don't make the same mistakes. So, look, I hate to do this thing to you where I have to sort of present this resume of my lived experience, but for this particular video, because I'm going to be talking about things like queer identity, I'm going to be talking about things like transphobia, racism, societal inequities, classism. There are so many things, and I think that before I talk about them, I need to address the perspective from which I used to look at things and the perspective from which I'm looking at them now. So I promise it is relevant when I tell you that I am non-binary. I am bisexual or pansexual. It's not a conversation that I'm planning to have in this video, so ask me another time. That I have been diagnosed with many mental illnesses again, which I won't bore you with, but just know that like doctor confirmed many mental illnesses, as well as being what they lovingly call high functioning autistic. To quote Hannah Gadsby, that would imply that I function highly. And that is just a complete misunderstanding of what high functioning autism is. But I'm sure many of you already know that. And again, it's not the topic of this video. I just promise that it is relevant to know where I'm coming from. Cool. And if you're watching the video, then you can obviously see that I am pretty much as white of a fairy as it gets. If you're just listening to the audio, now you know I am like exclusively descended from British people, white. But before we get into the real like meat and potatoes of the video essay, I just wanted to say hi everyone, I'm Lex the Fairy, and welcome to the Lonely Fairies Club. Oh, one last thing. Obviously, I'm going to be chaptering this video so you can see at the bottom, where you want to jump to if you'd like to. A lot of the first half of this play, shall it be called, I will be talking mostly about my personal experiences and why I loved Rent so much, and, how I came to have the warped perspective of loving Rent so much and not understanding the very deep, many problems with it. But post intermission, I will be talking a lot more about steps we can take, things I have specifically learned, and lessons you can take away from looking at, old media like this. Older media. I would really love to not feel ancient, but So I'm hoping that you'll stick with me for the whole thing. But of course, I understand if you just want to get to just like the research parts and stuff, you can find that down the things. Anyway. So, guess what extremely fun topic we're going to start this section with? Internalized racism. I personally grew up in Canada, in what most people would probably consider the suburbs. And due to what I now realize was systemic racism, I lived in a highly affluent neighborhood with all white people. And because of the way that school districts work, most of the people I was exposed to organically, because when you're a kid, most of the people you're going to meet are in your neighborhood or at your school are also white. In fact, I distinctly remember there being exactly one black girl in my entire elementary way through grade 4 to grade 8. I'm not saying any of this to make an excuse. It's just the truth that I wasn't exposed to people of color for much of my formative growing up years. Another big issue for me personally was being exposed to what I would call a lot of quiet racism. Um, People who I don't wish to name, but in proximity to me, who perpetuated a lot of hard to identify problematic thought patterns, because when you're a kid, you only know what's relative to you. And so, I mean, anything can be normalized when you're like too small to know better. And, when a person is only exposed to one type of thinking, it's not even going to occur to them to think about something else because, like, you don't know what you don't know when you're a little kid, like before your brain has formed. And when I say kid, I really mean a kid, like from like let's look at school age. So from like 4 to like 13, right? Like obviously things changed when I was in high school, but it clearly didn't change that much because high school was when Rent became like my favorite movie, but we're going to get to that. I should mention that there were obviously other kids of color in my school, but not in my class. See, I did French immersion, and I know this seems irrelevant, but please stay with me. And when you're doing that, it means that 80% of your classes are in French instead of English, right? It's basically the reverse of when you have like all English classes and then like one French class. So why didn't I become friends with more kids of color in my school? Well, it's because, okay, it's this again, it's not an excuse. I probably could have tried harder, but where I was at least, because there was only one French immersion class for each grade compared to like 3 or 4, of each other grade in the English, like the regular program. The French immersion kids had this reputation of being like goody goodies and smart Alex, or I don't know. Basically, they thought that because we were taking French and that was harder language wise, that we therefore thought we were smarter and better than them. And frankly, I never had that thought until anyone just like said it to me, and I was pretty confused by it my whole life. See, at the time, I didn't have anybody to explain systemic racism to me, institutional racism. I didn't know what a lot of these kids of color were going through in their like home lives. And to be honest, again, because what kids go through is all relative, those kids probably also didn't necessarily always know how much difference was between us. But here's the thing. Typically speaking, when you have less wealth, you understand the things that you don't have because they're thrown in your face all the time. But the wealthier you are, the less you know about people who have less wealth than you. And this is why I think that a lot of people who are like born into wealth don't have a lot of empathy because they literally have no idea what it's like to be challenged. And I think in order to have empathy, you have to actually have been through something and struggled and felt pain and grief and disappointment. And, anyways, that is getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Also, it's a bit of an adjacent topic, let's say. But what I'm really trying to say here is that those kids in my school who would make fun of us in the hallways and push us down in the yard and didn't want to be friends with any of us, I never understood their hostility at the time. But when you zoom out and look at the difference in our lives, then yeah, maybe you can start to see why they might be hostile, right? Obviously, I wish somebody had stepped in and like explained anything to me about the way that our society is constructed or the way that white privilege works, but unfortunately, that would not come until much, much later in my life. Next, let's talk about homophobia. See, unlike the racism, my exposure to queerness wasn't necessarily demonized. Like with racism, it was very much like being encouraged to stay in your in group. Whereas with queerness, it was just sort of like it's supposed to happen behind closed doors where nobody else can see it and you shouldn't have to be exposed to it if you don't want to and blah 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 blah, blah so much stupid stuff like that, right? So obviously my family and such never asked if I was queer because the assumption, generally speaking, is that you're not unless you come out. Why do you think coming out is a thing? Anyways, that is a whole other topic that we're not going to get into right now because this is about specifically homophobia in terms of raising a child to have very, again, like warped perspectives of queerness and the queer community. And so obviously, if they weren't going to ask about my queerness, I certainly wasn't going to tell anybody. And so, you know, like I said at the beginning, I have been with a lot of different people of all different genders, but you know, I'm just not loud about it around certain people who were around for those formative years. And honestly, it's always felt a little bit odd to me because I was raised in this fairly like intolerant environment, and yet I never had any bad feelings towards people who had different skin, different religions, gay. I mean, by the time I was entering high school, I only really knew about gay and lesbian. There wasn't a lot of trans representation at all, and there was basically just exclusively bi erasure. But it was sort of like I never thought badly about anybody. I never even considered acting differently towards a person of color or a gay person than I would towards a white person or a straight person. You know what I mean? And I don't know how that happened. And I guess maybe this is like the nature versus nurture thing because, like, I honestly don't know how I'm, this cryptid queer and the people who I grew up around are very much the opposite. However, like I said, things did start to change when I got into high school. And what happens around the beginning of high school is you're hitting puberty, right? And I guess my attraction to all genders was evident, although a lot of female friends were brushed off as, like I said, just friendship, and some of them were, and some of them were more than that. But again, that is a story for another day. This is more about the hostility only showing up with the people in my environment when I began getting more physical, when it became apparent. I'm a very touchy person. I love to hug and cuddle and, kiss and nuzzle and everything. I'm sort of like a puppy that way. Anyways, point is, when I started doing that with my female friends, there was a lot of hostile inquiry about my sexual orientation. When I was in grade like 11, I think, somebody started our high school GSSA, the Gay Straight Student Alliance, and I joined immediately. I was from the first meeting there. And at the time, I was sort of still identifying as just ally because, again, biness wasn't really thing I even knew about, despite being with girls by that point. Anyways, it did get a little bit worse when my two best friends at the time, who at the time were both presenting as women, um, got into a relationship, and they were considered lesbians by my mother. Obviously, I'm using this terminology because there has been some changes, but that is not here nor there. That is their business. And I'm just saying that at the time they were the lesbians to the people around me. And because I would have sleepovers with them like every single weekend because we were really good friends, like best friends, like that's what you do when you're young. Anyways, so it was like every single weekend I was over there for like almost the whole weekend, like, just watching anime and eating junk food that my family wouldn't let me have. And after that point of them beginning to date, it was like every time I went there, it was an interrogation. At one point, there was an attempt to ban me from sleeping over there because apparently once you explain your sexuality, you automatically have the desire to touch every person of that gender. Like, I don't understand how some of these homophobes' minds even work. You know what I mean? And regarding my own personal coming out, well, like I said, it's sort of a don't ask, don't tell. I don't think the people around me even care that much, to be honest with you. Those people at least. And hmm, regarding coming out of the closet and everything, it's not really that. It's not that I hide it. It's not really about shame. It's sort of just more about being too tired and, I guess, curating who I am around certain people. I mean, if you want to use YouTube marketing terminology, like, some people are just not my target audience, so I don't, show my content to them, if you will. Sorry, I know that's like rotten creator brain, but those are good analogies for why I don't bother showing my full self to a lot of people. And of course, we can't have this section without addressing transphobia. Now, we're lucky in some ways that trans people have had more opportunities in recent years, and they've been able to be a little more open, but let's not mince words here, okay? Things are still real bad for most trans people out there. And it's just like, because of this being even recent, these tiny baby steps we've had recently. I mean, when I was a kid, like, gay stuff was barely even talked about. So, like, I had no exposure to trans stuff. Well, no exposure to trans stuff in like positive light. See, back in those days, pretty much everything about trans people was equal parts setup and punchline.
In Western culture, cross-dressing has often been used as a shorthand for deception, but not always maliciously so. In fact, for most of history, cross-dressing men are portrayed as neutral or more often comical. In the Iliad, Achilles tries to get out of war by dressing as a woman, but Odysseus figures him out when he gives Achilles a gift of perfume, and Achilles doesn't lose his shit over the gift, like women do. In Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, protagonist Viola takes up service for Duke Orsino disguised as a young man named Cesario. After some comic misunderstandings and lots of cross-dressing, Viola's identity is revealed and it's fine, compulsory heterosexuality all around. The benign cross-dresser motif remained popular well into the 20th century, with entries like bosom buddies, Tootsie, Some Like It Hot, and white chicks.
Again, like, it never occurred to me to, like, question someone's identity. I never thought about, like, telling somebody, no, like, you're not that gender. That would be like telling somebody that's not your name. It just doesn't make sense. And, the first time I actually met a trans woman, and embarrassingly, that was at age 18. She introduced herself to me, and I was just like, okay, like, it's nice to meet you. And it was. And, like, there was no other, like, questions after that. This is one of those things where I really try to put myself in people's shoes and try to understand where they're coming from. This is one thing I just can't fathom, when people are like, no, I want to know about your ethnicity or your sexuality or what's in your pants or like whatever. It's like, why? Just why? It doesn't matter. At what point does this really matter to you? It only matters really if you're that concerned about people's genitals, if you're going to, boink them. So if you're not planning on banging any of these people, then it really doesn't matter. And even then, that really only has to do with like the whole sexuality thing. And look, it's stupid. I don't understand it. And now I'm getting flustered because I feel like I'm so at a loss for understanding how people can be this dumb. It's like making me feel like I'm dumb. Also, just to say, I never thought about people being able to pass or the concept of passing. Like, somebody tells me they identify as female or they like me to use she, her pronouns if I make a mistake, or maybe they just say it up front. I've never ever thought to question that or to go back on that. Like some people in my life who, like, how do you have a friend with a trans son and not only continue to dead name him and use the wrong pronouns, but also when I asked what his name was, they couldn't even remember. Like, yeah. Can you see now why I get so flustered about this stuff? I mean, I hope that anybody who would have a heart could understand and be flustered by this kind of thing. It's a lot. So to wrap it up here, I just wanted to say that I've never really understood how people use, well, it's just the way I was raised, as a defense for having a controversy or being canceled, which let's not even start about that terminology. Anyways, when somebody has a controversy, especially if they've said racist things or homophobic things, especially like a lot of racist things, like I'm looking at Brooke Schofield a few years back when all those racist tweets of hers resurfaced. And oh my gosh, D'Angelo Wallace did an amazing video called like "There's Nothing Shocking About Brooke Schofield's Racism," because like there really isn't.
I really liked this TikTok that said, while you educated yourself on unlearning literal racism, a little POC kid had to unlearn the self-hate you instilled in them. To anybody who has, I guess, more sympathy in their heart for Brooke in this scenario, this rich woman who will continue to be rich and successful and honestly face no consequences for the most part because everyone's going to forget about this. I just feel like if we were okay making it through the environment that people like her were contributing to, she's probably going to be okay in the end.
And to say it's the way I was raised is such a bland, pop out, nothing statement. Like, I'm not expecting everybody to know right from wrong immediately. I certainly didn't. Like, some stuff you do have to be taught.
On the one hand, it's really hard to undo indoctrination that you went through as a child. And for all the talk that conservatives do about like drag queens and they're turning the kids trans, they try to use children as like a cheap excuse to send hate towards, I guess, literally everyone for existing. Conservatives are the people poisoning the brains of children. Children are not naturally hateful, okay? You're never going to sit here and convince me that hate is a thing that is just in people's hearts from the jump. Children emulate what they see. So when you are not just emulating something for so long as your entire childhood into your adulthood, but you're also getting this positive feedback loop of the adults around you encouraging you and supporting and agreeing with the racist stuff you're saying. But the truth of the matter is, just because I too relate to the experience of conservative talk radio brain rot infesting your thought processes, I surely hope you don't think it was the same for me as it was for her. Because while she did have the luxury of viewing all the aforementioned people as numbers basically, or just little political plot points to support her agenda, these were my people, okay? I was people. I was the numbers. This is why my parents were so horrified. This is why I was so horrified. Anytime anything would happen, and it was always happening. The amount of like absurdly advanced thoughts that I had to have as a child when it came to the state of the world, which is no different than any child who's put in an impossible situation where you basically tell them, hey, this is the way that you are, but the way that you are is not okay.
The difference, though, is that, like, and I'm not saying that, like, you have to be, oh, I'm some angel who has never questioned someone's identity. I don't know why I'm like that either, okay? But the difference is that even if I had some kind of feeling of pushback, it's like I just tried to educate myself, or if somebody corrected me, I would be like, oh my gosh, thank you, and I would listen to them. So this whole concept of it's the way I was raised or it was a different time, it's like, well, yeah, but like lots of things. Like, are you still gonna eat stuff with lead in it? Are you still gonna put asbestos in a place you can breathe it in? Like, yeah, things were one way and then they change. And like, if you can't change, that says so much about you. People are never finished. We are always in a state of developing ourselves. And if you're not always trying to be a better person, what are you doing with your life? Seriously, you should always be striving to be better than yesterday, even if it's just one hair width better. You know? I guess, though, I should acknowledge that everybody is different, and I don't actually know the psychology of what exactly happens when people are exposed to certain stimulus or not. Like I said, it's the nature versus nurture thing, right? In any case, let's move on to looking at what exactly made me love Rent so much.
I'm not exaggerating when I say that Rent was my favorite movie when I was in high school. I had a TV and a DVD player in my bedroom, and the Rent DVD lived in that DVD player. It never came out. I would come into my bedroom, I would turn the TV on, I would hit play, and if the movie finished, I would just hit play again and start it over, and I would just pick up wherever I left off. And I was singing those songs everywhere. I was making my friends. Anyways, the point is, I really loved this movie. So, why? First reason, the representation. Now wait, before you get upset, I have come to realize now how much Rent minimizes people who are marginalized, and we're gonna get to that in a bit, but I did just finish telling you about my super sheltered white childhood, and you have to understand that for me, who was never exposed to anything, having all of these different types of people and seeing bisexual characters and characters who played with their genders, it's something that I had never been exposed to, and I was like, oh, these are my people. And hey, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that there's still nothing good to take away from Rent even now. So here are some of the good things that I actually did take from Rent. showing sex workers in a positive and non-judgmental light, having an actual bisexual character, even though she is flawed and a lot of stereotypes. But the point is that, like I said before, bi erasure is a really big thing, and I'd never really been exposed to that. Like in the way that I was seeing myself on the screen, and not to say that I am Maureen, although I feel like we probably do share a lot in common. My poetry is better, I swear. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Um, in any case, destigmatizing STDs and obviously HIV, AIDS in particular, re-examining monogamy, understanding classist culture, bringing more attention to different types of racism, and there's probably more. The point is that I think that those were all pretty good messages, and who knows how long it might have taken me to find them if it wasn't for Rent. Another thing that really drew me to Rent was its representation of the counterculture, if it can so be called, certainly of the time. And again, we're going to get to all the different ways that Rent whitewashes, in like the, not in the racial sense, but in like the actual like whitewashing sense, of counterculture, believe me. We'll get to it. I was raised with a lot of expectations that did not match up to the fairy that I was or am. And I always kind of felt like the black sheep of my family and my social circles. And I was always expected to behave in this very follow the rules, regimented, straight line, no straight edge, even. And when that's all you're seeing and you know that you don't fit into that world, you feel like you're a square block and someone is trying to cram it into like a circle hole and it just won't go. And so seeing the even the flawed version of the counterculture in Rent, again, it was like this massive relief and weight off my shoulders of like, oh, like I'm not alone. Like there are people out there. And of course, like any musical, so something that made me love Rent was the music. The songs were much more like of my taste, I suppose you could say. And okay, I have bad taste. I can admit that. Like in general, if you look at my channel, you can probably be like, wow, you have pretty bad taste. And like, it's just, it is what it is. But I love so many of those songs to this day. And even leading up to filming this, I have been dancing around to the Tango Maureen. And it's just like, I understand that a lot of people have criticisms of the adaptations of the songs. Unfortunately, I haven't ever seen the Broadway show or any version on the stage. I've only seen the movie, and I again know that this doesn't give a complete picture of everything about Rent as a whole, but I am kind of just talking about the movie in this respect. And don't get me wrong, I had really liked musicals in the past. I mean, like, I played Disney movies until like my parents were ready to throw me out the window, kind of thing. And those are all musicals. And I was a person who definitely appreciated musicals like Phantom of the Opera, like Sound of Music, but those are all very traditional. And Rent was sort of the first musical that I saw that was like rock music and, sort of like some rougher kind of lyrics and things that, like I've said, like I could relate to. And don't worry, we're going to go over why that was a problem in just a little bit. But I just have to really emphasize how much I love the music. Like, it was to the point where I would be walking down the street with my friends, belting it out, forcing them to learn the lyrics so that they could sing the multi-part songs with me. Sometimes I would just duet with myself. What can you do? Oh, the final key aspect of my appreciation of the music in Rent is that it was music that I could actually sing. That's the thing, right? In like making all my friends learn, like they could sing it too. And admittedly, I did have mostly male friends, so that made it a lot easier in terms of like getting those parts done. But here's the thing is that I am an alto, and in most musicals, women are sopranos, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I understand that like there's also like a lot of like older women sometimes have like a lower range. But anyways, I sing in an alto range, which is odd, and it doesn't translate well to traditional musicals, but it translated so well for Rent. In terms of which characters I can sing the parts of best, I think in order it would be Mark, Roger, Joanne, Angel. So I've got one more personal story to tell you before I get into like lessons and takeaways and stuff. And don't worry, I am no longer an idiotic teenager in this story. I am an idiotic 21-year-old. At the time, I was dating this guy who was just like a major cinephile, and he was always showing me movies and taking me to the movies, and it was nice most of the time. Sometimes I had to sit through long Coen Brothers movies that maybe I'm too dumb for. But anyways, so due to, moving out of my parents' house and being a young adult, I hadn't watched Rent in a while at this point in time. It had been a few years. And after this guy had shown me so many movies and a lot of his favorite movies, I was so determined to show him one of mine. And so because he'd never seen it and was really not like a musical person, I was like, okay, you've got to watch Rent, because like Rent is a musical for people who aren't musical people. It's so good, and like, admittedly, I probably did hype it up too much, but I digress. Well, let's just say I lost him pretty early on in the movie. He basically, I mean, he wasn't mean or like outwardly angry, but he did sit there with his arms crossed, kind of an impressed look on his face for basically the whole thing. Now, he very respectfully stayed through the whole movie. He paid attention, and he did deal with all my singing along, so that was really nice. Now, I had shown Rent to a lot of people at this point, and most of them were queer. So it was like, probably also partially because they were as sheltered as I was, but everyone I had shown it to had loved it. So I'm sure you can imagine my absolute horror and outrage as a, again, very dumb 21-year-old when, this boyfriend at the time of mine looked at me and said that the only good character in that entire movie was Benny, and that he was completely on Benny's side the entire time, and that he thought everybody else was stupid and unreasonable. Remember, I haven't seen the stage show, and the movie does kind of frame Benny as like this joyless antagonist character. So I obviously was not very fair to him in my earlier viewings, and of course treated him like an antagonist. That was my feeling. So it just like didn't compute to me when somebody said that this was the only good character, and like that was the only redeeming quality of the movie. I was like, what on earth are you even talking about? With hindsight being 2020, I can absolutely tell you why at the time I was so defensive of this movie. And no, it wasn't just because Benny wanted to tear down their crummy poetry venue or whatever. Um, it was because at the time I was just starting to be a little more out about my bisexuality, and I had started like sort of being more openly flirtatious and exploring things with other girls. And, you know, uh, at the time, just bear with me, gender is a spectrum. So, because at the time I kind of only had Rent as a queer thing to identify with, just wasn't as much queer stuff available as there is now. And a lot of it was geared towards like cis gay men, and I didn't have anything else that really had resonated with me the way that Rent had. And so obviously in this very like raw era of kind of trying to figure out who I am inside and everything, I have this favorite movie that I feel really represents me, and then here comes this guy, and he's like, no, it sucks, and that character you hate is the only good character. And it's like, anyways, the point of saying all that is just to be like, I'm trying to be a little more forgiving with my teenage self because, like, I really started a fight over that, and he was right. That guy was right. I mean, Benny was right, and that guy was right too. You have to understand also that in general, I was an artist and a creative in a environment where I mean, in this relationship, this person was very like business oriented and extremely knowledgeable, very, very smart, multiple masters. And I mean, not at that point, we were 21, but now. Um, but the point is that, and then, what I explained in the previous parts, and as an artist, when everybody's trying to push you the opposite direction, it really does feel like you're the person that you want the most on your side is on the wrong side. And that was why I disliked Benny, because it was like, oh, these characters are like me, and he's on the wrong side. I I wasn't looking at it clearly, but actually what ends up being sort of funny, if not outright ironic, is that this guy who didn't like Rent at all, who I felt was like on the wrong side, he was actually the first person to really make me aware of some of the negative conservative ideas I had absorbed from my parents. So it's like, yeah, I didn't absorb their racism or their homophobia, but I did still absorb some stuff. I mean, I was a kid in that environment, and my parents are very, very conservative. And so, like, it's only natural that until you start being exposed to other perspectives, you're probably going to go with that one. And so this guy, he was actually the person who like really challenged me and pushed me to think of like why I had certain opinions about things. And even though when we first had started dating, I kind of thought his parents were almost like crazy a little bit. I love his parents, by the way. Shout out to them. I'm not going to name them, but just adore them to death. But in any case, but basically they taught him to question everything, and it turned out that that was really useful in breaking some of the negative thought patterns that I had as a young adult. And so I do really think that it's the greatest irony that it's like, oh, you're on the wrong side of all these like gender and class and everything war, but you're still the one who kind of saved me. I mean, it's a lot to put on one person to say that he saved me, but he certainly gave me the boost I needed to get out of that pit and encouraged me to start learning. So ultimately, I guess it was worth it, even though he did hate my favorite movie at the time, and it did cause a fight. And hey, I never toot my own horn, okay? But I do kind of think that maybe we could look at this situation and extrapolate the lesson that we should always be open to the idea that we're wrong or misinformed or we haven't seen the complete picture. Being wrong isn't like a moral failing. It just means you haven't learned something yet. And this is really, rich coming from me, who is the most unforgiving person of whenever I personally make a mistake. I never forgive myself for that, but I am telling you that you need to keep your mind open, and being wrong is just an opportunity for growth. And if you stop being so defensive of the things you care about, you might actually find that you have room to grow somewhere you didn't even know you had to. Back in the Tango Maureen section, I mentioned how even though I loved the movie and story and characters so, so, so much, as a teen, when I was naive, I have now come to understand all the problematic things about the story, especially in the movie. Well, I was able to do that because of, learning from other people. And I just wanted to start things off with this clip from video essay master Dan Olson of the Folding Ideas channel because I think he summarizes like a lot of Rent's issues really quickly right here.
But the movie's been out for 12 years and the musical has been around for 20, so it's a pretty well-trod path to point out that Maureen is emotionally abusive and gaslights her girlfriend Joanne, that Mark is a misery tourist who refuses to use his relative privilege to help his marginalized friends, that Mark is an awful artist who exemplifies the worst habits of lazy artists, that Benny is making fairly sensible decisions but rightful criticisms of gentrification are absent in favor of calling him a sellout, that Mark quits an incredibly well-paying part-time job just so he can finish cutting together his home movie, which just, what?
From here on in, I shoot without a script.
That the story commodifies the HIV epidemic as window dressing to give the characters the pathos of a death sentence rather than say anything cogent or meaningful about the way that society reacted to HIV and AIDS in the 80s. And that Mark's principal concern for the homeless stems from his belief in the transitive artistic properties of suffering. Thus, living next to homeless people makes him and his art more authentic and real by extension.
And if you're not familiar with Dan Olson, then you've almost certainly heard of Lindsay Ellis. I believe she's affectionately referred to as the mother of video essays. Um, I was a little bit late to her train. In fact, so late that she had already more or less left YouTube, although I understand she's back now. It was, I mean, I hope that doesn't make me less of a fan. I just wasn't spending a lot of time on YouTube when I started watching her channel. And anyways, the point is that I gobbled up all her Disney content. Obviously, I mentioned how I'm obsessed still to this day with all those musicals I watched so much as a kid. And of course, Phantom of the Opera, because I love Patrick Wilson and I love Phantom of the Opera, although I do not love Joel Schumacher. That's a whole other conversation. I'm sure you would expect that when I saw that she had a video essay about Rent, that I would be really excited, but I was actually a little bit worried because I could see right from the title and thumbnail that it was going to be a critical take. And look, I really have started to do my best to not become echo chambered and to listen to more and more opinions from a variety of sources because the last thing I want to do is completely lose perspective from any side of what's happening in the world. And I want to make sure I'm listening to people. So I figured, well, Lindsay Ellis is another white girl like me, and we have a lot in common. And so I figured if anyone could, get criticism across to me in a way that I could handle, especially at the time, it would be her. And at first, I was completely riding the train of the classist commentary about the nature of Broadway. And, this is something that a lot of people have talked about. I might put in a clip here, I might not, depending on how long this video ends up being. But basically, it's like hard to make a Broadway show that comments on wealth when the only people who can afford Broadway tickets are the wealthy. And in fact, Lindsay in this video sums up my feelings on the show Hamilton so well. I actually just took it right off my own list of video ideas because it's like, well, that's kind of like, and I mean, I understand that she made a video essay about Rent. I'm making a video essay about Rent. Obviously, like topics can be covered, and I might still make it. But for the sake of other ideas, I've kind of burnered it, if you will. So yeah, I was happily riding that train, but it was mostly all about the original stage show. And then she moved on to the movie. And uh look, please don't misunderstand me. I am the first person who can admit when I was wrong about something, and I'll always take criticism and feedback. I'm happy to learn. I hope I imparted that enough on you in the previous sections. However, but when I heard Lindsay, this person who I'd come to really admire and aspire after, say the words Rent is a movie about selfish, horrible people. My stomach just dropped out.
Rent is a musical about selfish, horrible people, framed like freedom fighters. They show profound entitlement over other people's rights and property, but it is framed like romantic rebelliousness. A restaurant owner begs them, please don't patronize our restaurant, please.
Please, no, not tonight. Please leave.
They then ignore him when he asks them not to move the tables around.
Please don't move the tables.
Hey, Rosie, let's put these tables together. Slide down this way, come on.
No.
Maureen is an emotionally abusive cheater who gaslights all of her partners. Angel comes into wealth at the beginning by killing a dog.
But sure as I am here, that dog is now in doggy health.
Mimi is a self-destructive codependent enabler. Collins honors the memory of his dead lover by hotwiring a local ATM to dispense cash for him and his friends when you plug his name in.
I rewired the ATM at the Food Emporium. Now all you need is the code ANGEL.
And Mark. Sweet Mark. You might be the worst thing to have ever happened.
And you are... I'm just here to...
To appropriate your tragedy for my art without having obtained permission. I hope that's cool. Now, the fact that they are horrible need not be a problem.
I need your help to make my neighbor's yappy dog disappear.
Or even that their horribleness goes unexamined by the characters. That is, after all, a condition of human behavior. But the problem, like the faux revolutionary subtext, is with the framing. The show doesn't really go anywhere with this. Yes, we are so countercultural, like in this scene. The nadir of the film, where they dance on the table while the pearl-clutching suits are scandalized by the interests of the bohemians. Like huevos rancheros. Yeah, eating disorders. Woo! Rent's primary theme comes from the conflict between bohemian ideals and selling out for financial security.
And I know nothing is perfect except for The Mummy 1999. It is a perfect movie, and no, I'm not taking questions. But I guess I wasn't expecting such a total and thorough deconstruction of something not only that I'd loved for so long, but that I'd so completely failed to see the problems within. And honestly, I felt chastised for being so blind that I could fall into this trap, and the trap being that Rent was always a show meant for middle to upper class kids who wanted to feel like they were rebelling and sticking it to the man while actually doing absolutely nothing. And yeah, I did fall into that trap. I clearly was that kid. And if you haven't watched any of my other videos and don't already know this about me, I am a huge crybaby. So I ended up completely breaking down in tears at the end of the video, just sat in silence after it ended, bawling. Embarrassing, right? And I wasn't crying because I was in trouble or because I had allowed this person to chastise me. It wasn't that. It was that I fundamentally felt like a bad person for having not only not realized the flaws in the movie, but having loved it and defended it so much. And actually, what's extra ridiculous about this reaction is that in the conclusion of her video essay, Lindsay Ellis goes out of her way to say that if you like Rent, she doesn't think you're a bad person. But I felt like a bad person. I felt like she was just saying that to soften the blow and to retain viewers like me. And it made me just question everything. And yeah, I'm like, I'm a bad person. I'm a really bad person. And I'm a bad queer person too. Like, I fancy myself part of this community, and I never even realized half of this stuff. I never realized any of it. Wow, that is. And just so we're absolutely clear on this, Lindsay Ellis did not make me feel bad. I made me feel bad with the information that Lindsay Ellis gave me. I'm not blaming her for this. In fact, I thank her for allowing me to actually be able to look at things I love with a bit more of a critical and perspectivized view. So, to a degree, I do understand that it's unrealistic to expect yourself to know everything. And obviously, you should, research, but like I said earlier, it's one of those things where you kind of can't know what you don't know if you're not ever exposed to things. And although I like to hold myself to a much higher standard than I would ever hold anybody else to, and I like to be really hard on myself for not knowing the things I don't know, I think it's an important message for anyone listening that, like, it's okay to not know stuff. And that's something I'm still internalizing, but it really is okay. It's what you then do with the information or not that determines what kind of person you are. And hey, since I want this video to be about vulnerable honesty and how it takes being vulnerable and honest to be a better, more responsible person, I can admit that it really wasn't until the Black Lives Matter movement happened that I realized just how embedded, how systemic and institutional the racism in North America is. And I understand that Europe has different and Asia different and, like, everywhere obviously has their own version of racism, but I can only speak to where I live. And Canada is basically the same as the US, so I'm kind of like North America. I don't know about Mexico. I'm sorry. Look, this is getting off the point. The point is that I didn't know. Like, I was the kind of idiot who still thought that, like, racism was only like the loud kind, like the white supremacist kind, or it was like the kind that I mentioned earlier that was very much like, you should really, date somebody who's within your own race because, it's just easier to date someone who you have more in common with. And it's like, yeah, you like that's pretty transparent. But like the levels of institutional racism that are built into things like government and housing and all these other structures that are supposed to exist for social support are so rooted in being against POCs and for white people. It's like more than invisible because, like, it's not like it you can't see it unless you go looking for it. And it did take me until Black Lives Matter to go looking for it. And obviously I can't fix the problem immediately, but I did go out and I looked for a bunch of books from Black authors and academics, and then I branched out into looking at more POC literature on things like intersectional feminism and how to better support the trans community and stuff like that. And again, obviously, these things don't instantly fix the problems, but we absolutely cannot address anything if we don't know these things. And it all starts with one thing. And honestly, like, I don't know about you guys, but for me, I love learning. Learning makes me want to learn more and more. And I really hope that you can find some authors who, or video essayists, or whoever can do the same thing for you. I am going to have some recommendations in just one of the later sections. So that is coming, but I just wanted to let you know that that was my experience. Just to nip this in the bud, if you have friends of color, many of them are probably going to be happy to help you understand more things about the types of problems that they face. However, you should always seek to do the vast majority of the emotional labor of learning these things on your own. The POC are already dealing with this stuff. They don't need to also deal with like your white guilt and like having to teach you step by step everything. You should be trying to go out of your way to learn as much as possible on your own. And then if you want to have more specific to like your life kind of conversations, or if you want someone's like more personal opinion, then yeah, take it to your friends of color and make sure you have friends of color. Like, honestly, it was pretty embarrassing for me when I looked around and saw how white my friend group was back in 2016. And I'm really happy that I've branched out. And I mean, I'm not saying that to sound like some freaking after school special, okay? I don't have a friend group who's like every color, like some kind of cereal commercial, okay? I just mean that, like, by naturally allowing myself to be in more diverse situations, I was able to make more friends, and making those friends has helped me and opened my eyes to more and more things. And most importantly, they've been my friends. I mean, I started the Lonely Fairies Club because, with life and adulthood and living in different realms, if you will, it can be harder and harder to see your friends. And so I thought, well, if I can't necessarily always have these conversations with the people closest to me, then why not see if I can share them with more people? Some of my best friends in the world I've met online, and no, I'm not looking to like build some super parasocial relationship with you. Don't worry. I just think that there's always room for more love in the world. So just to wrap this section up, I do think that we all, myself included, need to get better at looking at more perspectives, examining the things that we already love, and being okay with being wrong and not knowing stuff. And so it's like one of those things that doesn't happen overnight. It absolutely is going to be one step at a time, but it's okay. You should be proud of any step you take. Like I said earlier, if you're just a hair's width better than yesterday, then that's amazing. And hey, sometimes if you're just the same as yesterday, that's okay too. As long as we're not going backwards, then we're succeeding, right? In my opinion, when I discovered that Rent was bad and like really quite bad in a lot of ways, for me, it wasn't enough to just stop loving something I had loved and been like, Rent bad. It's like, felt like I needed to sit with why I had loved it so much, and not just, oh, like the things I mentioned in the past, because yes, it was my first kind of representation of counterculture and queer people and, everything I mentioned before. It also must have spoken to me in some way, right? Like on a deeper level, there must have been not just love, but something that actively kept me blinded to the problems with it. And I thought for me, in order to like get better, not just as a person, but also to be able to more easily identify when things like this are the case, I needed to really sit with it and figure it out. So, one of the most major and most valid criticisms of many characters, but particularly Mark, is that they throw away perfectly supportive family structures in order to play poor.
Go outside. About 15 minutes later, everyone's done with their poverty porn, so they come and join me.
And when you look at everybody's opinion of the movie and even the show to some degree, and everybody's like, yeah, Mark is the worst character. Mark is terrible. And I'm here like, crap. When I was a teenager, I really liked Mark. And I, again, had to figure out why, and this is what I came up with, okay? I mentioned earlier in the video about how I grew up in an environment that was kind of conservative, bit racist, bit homophobic, bit transphobic, to put it nicely. And I haven't really admitted this to many people because admitting mental illness stuff has become very complicated these days since TikTok kind of took to diagnosing themselves with everything under the sun. I find it very difficult now to speak about my legitimately like diagnosed, medicated conditions that I have because I can just feel people not believing me. But that's a different conversation. Point here is that I've been diagnosed with CPTSD, complex PTSD, and that is a condition that is unlike PTSD in the way we understand it, which is typically caused by like a singular or several high intensity, high adrenaline impacts. So, like, that's why you see like soldiers coming back from war with PTSD, or somebody who has been violently physically abused may have PTSD, stuff like that. But if you looked at where I grew up, how I grew up, you would never see anything to suggest that I was anything like that. My family appears very, very normal from the outside, and if people look at them, they kind of shrug their shoulders, and you don't realize really how much damage is being done. And even if somebody tries to take it to you, you might not even be willing to hear it. So, keeping that in mind, I guess in some kind of horrible way, I related to Mark, that message that he gets in the movie where his family is like, "Are you coming for Christmas? We love you so much." And he has this line where he's like, sometimes when we're freezing and bro broke and starving, I'm paraphrasing here, I wonder why I do this, and then they call and I remember. And yeah, that's that that comes across as super insensitive to person who grew up without money or without family or without any kind of solid support. I could go on, but I just wanted to share that, in my case, I've gotten a lot of messages like that, like the ones from Mark's family, that sound really nice to anyone on the outside, probably, that sound all, "We love you so much." But those people who are saying that's so insensitive, like, I can't speak for Mark, but I can speak for me. And, like, you don't know how that love is weaponized and used against you to tear you down and make you feel stupid or wrong or useless, or like worse than some other person you're being compared to, how your self-esteem, your self-worth can be destroyed, how your judgment and anything that you come up with is basically deemed as worthless. I really, really understand how crappy stuff like that voicemail scene must seem like to somebody who doesn't have that kind of stuff. And I really wish that we could find better ways than freaking Alphabet City in the 90s, to deal with that kind of stuff. And sorry if I'm coming across as a little weird here. I'm just trying to keep it a little bit lighthearted, even though it's a heavy subject, because I'm not trying to be a bummer. I'm not trying to depress you guys. I just want to get across this information. And I think being authentic and explaining this kind of stuff is important. Let me be clear though, because I do think that it's also very important to take these kinds of realizations to their full conclusion, which is that even though I did go through those things, I was still in a much more privileged position than many, many other people. You know, I I had to endure things that other people have had to endure, but then also have all the disadvantages of being like a POC or a trans person in our society. Those people have dealt with similar emotional abuses or worse, and they're still marginalized. And ultimately, even though I am unable to work a traditional job, and I have a lot of anyways, I want to stay at least a little bit on topic here. So let me just say this. No, it isn't a pain Olympics, and nobody else's pain invalidates yours. If you went through something bad, then that's really awful, and that sucks, and your pain is valid. However, I think that Mark would have been a much less just this awful character, especially in the movie. It wouldn't be so bad, and we probably wouldn't invalidate his pain if he had ever at any point used that position of privilege to help uplift or help out his less privileged friends, you know? So, no, I don't think that my CPTSD is an excuse for not doing better. And I don't think it, makes Mark a better character. It just informs what I've been through and the reasons why I relate to what I relate to. Another thing that I obviously really identified with was the whole like counterculture esque thing, think La Vie Boheme, right? It's like I was fitting right into that category of like, kids who are well off to afford theater tickets, but still think that they're, you know, rebels against society. And I sure was like that as a teen. And I mean, now I try to take a little more action because I'm able to. Another huge issue with Rent is the medical aspect, or rather the lack thereof. Yes, the show is about people who have HIV AIDS, but they really gloss over it and whitewash a lot of what was happening. There are so many things that were happening in the time period that Rent is set in, with the so-called gay crisis, and when AIDS started ravaging these communities, it was most governments' responses to look the other way and
A criticism of Thatcherism, the policies of austerity, of rigid enforcement of Christian norms, the violent suppression of political dissent, of a rising homegrown fascist movement, criticisms that predate the AIDS crisis but would hold true well into the 80s as governments decided it was unofficial policy that AIDS was a divine punishment and a solution to their gay crisis.
Are there any queers in the audience tonight?
It really wasn't that vague.
yeah, it was a nightmare. And even though in the Rent movie you see these characters like raging against the man, like Benny, I guess, and watch my you'll see section to hear about Benny, they never bother showing just how horrible, awful, destructive this epidemic was. And I do think that a big part of my total obliviousness to this aspect of the story is partially because I live in a place with universal health care. I've never had to watch a family member or somebody I love die because they couldn't afford treatment. That seems barbaric to me. Look, when I was watching the movie as a teenager, obviously I had like the normal empathetic reactions of being like sad for people when they have an incurable illness, especially one that is so awful. I mean, all autoimmune stuff is awful. Let's not try to categorize. Like I said, it's not a pain Olympics. But I didn't comprehend the larger aspects of the medical story, and from what I understand, the Broadway show glosses over this, and the movie glosses over it even more to the point where it's nearly absent. I mean, you get one scene in a hospital. That doesn't feel adequate once you learn how bad things actually were during the AIDS crisis. Let's not mince words here. Governments tried to cover it up. They intentionally looked the other way. They were burying their shame, which was, the people they were burying. Yeah, there's a reason that kill your gays is a trope, okay? And it's not just because, you know, people are homophobic. It's also because structures are homophobic. And I was sheltered as like at a normal level for like a sheltered kid. How could I possibly be exposed to things that governments were hiding from us? Like, gosh, it's just when you start to pull at the thread of systemic injustice, the whole thing unravels really fast. And it's just a shame that it took me so long. And I hope any of you who are watching that are younger can maybe hopefully take some good stuff away from this without having to wait as long as I did. For this section, there is one thing I want to say above everything else, and that is do not wait for a marginalized person or person of color or a person in any position like that to explain stuff like this to you, especially if you've done something insensitive and you can tell that you've done something wrong. Now, I understand that in some cases you may be close with people of color and they may be comfortable approaching you as a friend or something like that, but never, ever, ever ask like colleagues or acquaintances or strangers, God forbid, to like do this work for you, to have to answer your oblivious questions. And again, like, I'm not going to tell you what relationships you have with the marginalized people in your life, but I'm just going with what I've experienced and from what I've heard. And trust me, people dealing with systemic injustice, they're dealing with enough. They don't need to answer your questions. The information is out there now more than ever. I mean, there's so many books I could have read before that I just didn't. And now you have the internet, you can download books, you have video, you have audiobooks even. Like, there are so many ways to consume the information, so there isn't really an excuse for making another person do the work for you. Like, I do understand that heavy reading can be intimidating to some people. I get it. I personally love reading. That's always been a thing of mine, especially a nice hard copy of a book, you know, that I can take notes in or highlight. But I get that can be intimidating, which is why I say, like, there's so many awesome educational YouTubers out there right now. So don't be afraid to go looking. But if you're not intimidated by reading and you're looking for some personal suggestions of mine, I have 4 that I would highly, highly recommend. White Tears, Brown Scars by Ruby Hamad. I would highly recommend that if you are a white woman, even if you think you are doing good intersectional work, please read this book. All white women should read this book and understand how much affirmative action has only really benefited white women. This is one I've recommended in other videos, I think 2 of them maybe. It's Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Dr. Beverly Tatum. I've actually read through this multiple times. It really, really is excellent. And honestly, if you care at all about the safety and lives of people of color, especially Black people, read this book, please. This one I took the dust jacket off of because I love a good hardcover, but I cannot stand dust jackets slipping and sliding all over the place. So this one is How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibrahim X. Kendi. And I do believe that this is a book that has been recommended by almost every like YouTuber of color who has done videos on like how to not be an ally, how to not be a racist. If you want a good starting place for your education, this is it. And I saved my personal favorite for last, another non-dust jacketed book. And actually, this book is kind of gross now that I look at it because, again, it's a favorite of mine. It's full of highlighter. And it's like you can see here, like the print is big, it's really spaced out. It's such an easy read. It is Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man by Emmanuel Echo. Aiko, I'm sorry. I should have looked that up. Um, in any case, if you want to read a book that feels like sitting down and having a conversation with an old friend, this is the book to read. Honestly, if you are not a reader, I would say that probably read this one before you read How to Be Anti-Racist because it is such an easier. I read it in less than a day. It honestly flies by, and it is probably also the one that draws like the clearest, straightest line in like layman's terms from basically like antebellum slavery and like honestly the importation of slaves to America all the way to the present day. And it is a storyline. There's stuff in here that shocked me even after all the readings I had done just post BLM. This this book. If you're going to take anything away from this video, it is Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. Please, please read it, buy a copy, and support the author because it's really worth it. In a previous section, I talked about my efforts to become unecho chambered because it's really easy. It's not even necessarily your fault. The algorithm wants to create an echo chamber for you. So sometimes you do have to go out of your way to find things. YouTube is a little bit better for this. Things like TikTok, like it's literally called a For You page. TikTok is exclusively echo chambers. I don't think you could make TikTok that isn't an echo chamber because then it wouldn't be TikTok. Personally, find it a little bit frightening how much it can just suck you into other content. So, with that being said, I'd like to encourage you to maybe listen to some more dissenting opinions. And okay, look, I am not telling you to have to force yourself to listen to people who like go against your personal values or whose opinions tread on the human rights of other people, okay? That would be terrible. That is absolutely not what I'm suggesting. What I am telling you, though, is that there are a lot of people out there, myself included in the past, where you think that you're getting both sides of something, but you're not. And I also think it's really important to remember that everybody on like YouTube or TikTok or whatever, this cryptid included, that we're performing. This is designed to be entertaining. I mean, I'm doing my best to be my most authentic self, but I'm still on a camera. I'm still presenting this to you in a way, in a fashion, in a format that I think will hopefully hold your attention and make you think about some things that perhaps you hadn't considered before. But not everybody is authentic, not everybody is honest. And it can be really hard to discern who's being truthful and who's not. Misinformation spreads like wildfire. And I don't think you need to like hear out like a both sides thing. In fact, like the idea that there are only two sides of any issue is like really oversimplifying it because like the world is just all nuance and that's probably another topic. Otherwise, this video would just go on and on and on forever. I just want to encourage you to listen to people who make you go, even if it's only for a second. You don't have to agree with them in the end. You can read an essay and not agree with the thesis and keep reading it and hear out the points. Maybe by the end you still won't agree with the thesis, and that's fine. Maybe they'll have made some good points. Maybe you still won't agree with the thesis, but you will have taken their valuable things away. And that's what I think can happen when you expand the variety of who you're listening to. Ultimately, I think that the most important thing that we can all do better is be wrong. Just get better at being wrong and admitting it. The fear of being wrong makes so many situations so much worse. And being wrong doesn't mean you're stupid. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you're pathetic or failure or unworthy, as I say these things to myself. but it just means you were wrong. It means you didn't have all the information. It means somebody told you something that wasn't all the information, or that they were misinformed, or maybe they were lying. But the point is that it's okay to be wrong, or to know wrong things, or to think wrong things, as long as you can accept being wrong. And speaking of video essayists who I love, I have included this exact clip in another video, but I'm going to include it again here because it so perfectly summarizes what I'm talking about, and that is a clip from F.D Signifier.
And this is like a missing point that a lot of allies do. We're so ready to dunk on, you know, right-wing, conservative, whomever, that like you're not thinking whether the dunk is gonna score points. I don't know how the metaphor is gonna go over, but you get my point. Is stop doing this shit.
That's another thing. Like, how much do you like to be right? But like, if you on a 0 to 10, you really like to be right, it's gonna be very hard for you to be an ally. Like at the 7, 8, 9, 10 mark, you don't know how to hear people, you don't know how to connect with people. You have an idea in your mind about what right is that you've established through who knows what, and it's going to be really hard to change. And allyship has to be more flexible than that. And I think most people get stuck because they want to be right. And so whatever the thing is they want to be right about, they will go hard on it. But sometimes you need to learn some other things.
Yeah, I think that's where I got stuck for a while.
A lot of people do. I love being right.
Yeah. Don't nobody like being wrong. Especially if you feel like you're right for real.
Like, also, sometimes I think that we could do better at accepting certain comments with more humility and grace and understanding. I know that some words feel really big and hurtful. Let's say somebody calls out something you said as being racist or transphobic. While that person was being really crummy, I wasn't calling them a transphobe. I was saying that they said something transphobic. It's the same thing as like, you can say something racist, but it doesn't make you a racist. And this is the problem. This is the disconnect that we really have a lot these days, is that when somebody tries to call something out, everybody is like, oh my God, you're saying that I hate, blah, blah, blah. I hate this person. I hate these people. And it's like, no, nobody said that. Everybody, like, or somebody just said, this thing that you said, this thing that you did, that thing was racist. And if you don't want to be a racist, you probably shouldn't do that again. What makes you a racist is when you know something is harming people, when you know something is bad, and you're still doing it. Then you are, yes, a racist. But like, sometimes racism isn't about hatred. Sometimes racism comes out as surprise, or just like something automatic from the way that you were raised and insulated during your formative years. It doesn't make you a bad person. And if we can all accept that, like, we are capable, we are all capable, all humans are capable of saying something bad, that doesn't make us bad people. Okay? So let's work on accepting that and being a little more gracious when somebody tells us that we've said something wrong or bad. So, like, if you're presented with new information, you have to make the active choice to apply that to your life. So, after all of that, you might be wondering, what should I take away from this video? I mean, I've given you a lot of things to think about, but is there a moral to this story? To continue with the essay analogy I was using in the last section, I guess the thesis of this video is that we should never be above examining or criticizing things that we love, even if they were extremely important or we felt like they were formational for us. And I mean, the biggest example of that is Harry Potter. I mean, there are a lot of diverse opinions about the wizarding world of Harry Potter, not the theme park, but the, imaginary world itself. A lot of us, myself included, grew up with those books and movies near and dear to our hearts, and learning about what J.K. Rowling has been doing in the last few years, perhaps longer, with her massive wealth. It's discouraging. And it does force us to re-examine how much we want to support a person who is putting literally our money that we gave her towards invalidating trans women, towards passing legislation that disqualifies trans women as women. I just, like, that is Lex Luthor levels of using your wealth for evil, okay? And so a lot of people who have really struggled with the idea of giving up Harry Potter. And again, there's a lot of different opinions on like actually like completely giving up Harry Potter because of its creator. And I mean, the whole death of the author conversation, not J.K. Rowling's actual death. I'm not suggesting that. I mean like the literary term death of the author. It's like lots of artists were really bad people, and it just depends on how much you can separate the art from the person. And also, like, we weren't alive when Picasso was telling people that like 15-year-old children are at like their most fertile and therefore you should like never date a woman over 18 or something horrific like that. So I guess people are still comfortable having his paintings in museums. But for those of us who are right now witnessing the harm that somebody that we gave all that money to is doing, yeah, it does make us have to second guess. And it means more disappointing stuff. Like for many people, myself included, it means no longer giving that money. Anything that is licensed Harry Potter will have some form of money going to J.K. Rowling. And with the exception of the Universal Studios theme park, which like I can't help but like the part of the ticket sale that might go to her, like I want to go on the Velocicoaster, okay? I don't, even if I didn't go to the Wizarding World there, which I kind of like. Again, this is where it comes down to like appreciating the world versus giving the money. You really can vote with your wallet. And I know that in this day and age, it is rough to tell people to give up things that they love or to not engage in things that they love because of how the artist or the author or the creator or whatever is doing with that support. I get that sometimes you just have to do the things that make you happy, and I'm sympathetic to that. I'm not telling you to feel any way about Harry Potter. I'm just telling you that that's a really good example of people who have like fully like let go of Harry Potter, not just no more giving money, like this thing that like I grew up with that was a huge piece of my heart, like I have removed that now and left it behind because that person is hurting people like me. And so for others that like it's your personal choice, and if you don't have like any trans people in your life, then maybe it doesn't affect you at all and you don't feel that way. But if you care about anyone who feels strongly about it, then I urge you to reconsider your opinion. And I kind of said this before, but obviously, I just want to reiterate that we should never be above questioning our own behavior or things that we don't remember learning, because, like, so many things that you think you know, where did you learn them from? Probably just somebody told you, right? There's like a great Mark Maron bit in one of his specials where it's like, well, like how much do I really know? It's like, how do you know most of the things you know? Like, ah, some guy told me, and like that's true. And maybe that guy wasn't right, or like, I'm using guy amorphously here, not gendered, but like we have to always be in a state of re-examining what we're doing. Like I said, life is not stationary. Things are always going to be changing. We have to be willing to adapt. That's in our nature. Adaptation is in our nature. And people who fight it are honestly just like you're gonna get Darwined out of the gene pool, man. Like that's not how people are designed. So, I mean, it was a harsh lesson for me to learn. This too shall pass, but it will. So you have to get comfortable with understanding that things aren't always going to be the way you remember them, and information that you learned is going to be wrong. It's okay. It really is okay. Also, like I said about rich people and their often inability to develop empathy, I think that, like, if you completely lose your ability to question and see other people's perspectives, you're going to be socially stunted. Like, that's just the reality, is like people are not going to want to be around you. Frankly, I don't think anyone who clicked on this particular video is particularly socially stunted, at least not any worse than I was. Anyways, I don't want to end the video on too much of like a bummer note, and I do think that there is actually a lot of hope for the way society is going in spite of the bad times we're having right now. I sometimes feel stupid having so much hope for the future, but what's the alternative? I don't want to be negative. I don't want to be a pessimist. It feels better to be an optimist, to be honest. And I mean, I'm trying now not to be a naive optimist, which is what I was before. And well, I just spent a whole video telling you why that was wrong. But I do think that when things get bad, we at least need to hold on to a tiny sliver of hope and just realize that if we can improve ourselves a little bit, and if we can do better for the people around us and build happier, stronger, more supportive communities, then like things will get better on their own, because all I really want is a world where everybody feels safe and happy and welcome. And that's such like a hippie thing to say in a video, I'm sure filled with all kinds of ramblings like that. I did work from a script, but like mostly script notes that will like spark my thoughts. I try not to ever write like word for word. I don't like reading into a camera. I think it removes a little bit of the authenticity. All of this to say, just never be afraid to grow, okay? Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me through one of my most favoritist teenage movies and discovering how I found out all the problems and how I've tried to be a better person because of it. If you're still with me, if you listen to everything, I would love to hear about your thoughts on Rent. If you saw it, or if you didn't see it, maybe you can tell me about a thing that you loved that was really formative that you had to contend with later in life. I would love to know more about it. All right, I won't keep you here any longer. I like spending time with you. What can I say? Thank you again for being here with me. And of course, stay happy, stay healthy, because you are precious.